Okay, so we're going to look at the differences primarily between a 4 and a 5. Here is that graphic once again. And just to illustrate the huge differences between a 3 and a 4, look at the results section here for this score point 3. Let me scroll down to the bottom. Actually, I'm talking about the section past the results. There it is. That's the whole thing that covers all of the implications, the limitations, what this means for this particular discipline, and so forth. It's all right there. So obviously this isn't very sophisticated. It's just not going to be very much. So let's take a look at the 4. Now remember that the 4 is going to be a paper where once we get past the results and into the justification and the limitations and the implications, it's going to be oversimplified. Here it is. Here's the discussion section. And you can already tell just by the length, so watch me scroll here, that there's not a whole lot going on. So the results section on this one is pretty extensive. But what it's doing is it's going through several advertisements, and it breaks them down according to this criteria that this student has decided to implement for this study. Oh, by the way, let me take you up here so you'll know what this one is about. So this particular paper, this 4, is trying to look at how advertising has approached the work-family conflict throughout several, I guess, generations or years. So the work-to-family conflict is basically this in this paper. There's a kind of ideal that was established in the 20th century that healthy families eat together, that's precious time. And as more and more women went to work, they found that having this time where the well-cooked meal that's prepared and everybody sits down together and eats is really under a lot of pressure because women are also working 9-to-5 jobs. And so who's going to do that? Well, so apparently TV dinners, I ate a lot of these when I was growing up. They were never any good. But these frozen dinners then marketed themselves as a way to protect or preserve this particular time. And today, apparently, there are these meal delivery kits, as well as TV dinners, that are also being marketed this way. So the student is looking at and sort of charting the development of this particular marketing strategy, which he calls WTFC, work to family conflict, right there. The gap that this person identifies is here. So far, no research paper has profiled this consistent marketing strategy. Thus, this study analyzes the advertisements of meal delivery kits and TV dinners, later using the findings to illustrate the role that WTFC and related concepts play in convenience food advertising. So I guess the question is, to what extent do these particular advertising ploys are they still in practice today? And so this person designs this way of analyzing different advertisements and then goes through and analyzes different advertisements. Now, once we get down here to the discussion, where we're arriving at the new understanding, here it is. Through the analysis, it is evident that an appeal towards the preservation of the family dinner in the face of an increasingly hectic work-family dynamic has been a central point in the marketing arcs of both modern-day meal delivery kits and Cold War era TV dinners. Okay, so there's a connection between the way that I was the Cold War era kid, TV dinners were marketed and the way that meal delivery kits are marketed today. Still using this work family conflict marketing ploy. However, the study does possess some design flaws. So this person's going immediately from the new understanding arrived at to the flaws or the limitations here. He or she states, however, the study possesses some design flaws. The scale used to measure each advertisement's appeal towards families serves only as a general tool and in no way accounts for all possible marketing situations. Okay, so the limits of the approach. Moreover, the allotment of points and the qualitative analysis process were partially based off subjective interpretations of the marketing materials in question, obviously. So this person looked at the marketing, looked at the advertisements and came to some conclusions based upon the criteria that he established. The final fault of the paper rests upon the fact that it treated implicit appeals to family convenience as the sole factor for the success of meal delivery kits and TV dinners, viewing the advertisements through a narrow lens. Due to these limitations, additional studies that take a more inclusive approach are called for. Okay, so now this is really simplistic here, right? So this person's just calling for a more inclusive approach, not really laying out what sort of approach that might be, why, what's the ultimate goal? Why is that necessary to enlarge this particular body of knowledge? There's going to be a little bit more down here. Regardless, the results of this study are able to illustrate the perpetual search for convenience in post-industrial society, where American consumers look to various products in order to compensate for the perceived shortcomings in their respective modernity. In this case, the shortcomings of WTFC and daily work tasks interfering with family interactions. Okay, so basically just sort of restating the conclusion that, yes, I found that we are still, in fact, advertising in this particular way, appealing to these certain values that Americans have. This isn't really mind-blowing either. I mean, it's definitely not super sophisticated, though. One thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't have to be. What they're actually looking for is, how well are you doing the research process? How well do you understand all facets of the research process? So it doesn't have to be a mind-blowing new discovery, though I'm sure some wow factor would help. But there's going to be one more recommendation in the end here, not too much in depth, but here it is. In future years, research concerning other convenience product categories should be conducted, linking cutting-edge innovations with their historical parallels in order to further demonstrate this concept, as it helps explain one of the trends found not only in American advertising, but within our society at large. Okay, well, whatever. It's kind of simplistic, right? It's especially simplistic when you compare it to the 5. So let's take a look here. Now, I am not going to go over the results section. It's not that terribly long, but it's in scientific jargon that I am not easily going to be able to improvise over. But I'll go to the discussion section because that's where a lot of these points are coming in. So here we are. We've got the findings. We're going to begin with those. The results of the study demonstrate that acculturation has a marked impact on the presence of iron in the foods prepared by first-generation Mexican Americans in the population area of interest, as iron values published by the USDA were higher than those measured by the collected samples. So remember, this student both surveyed Mexican American families in a particular area and then also took food samples and tested their iron content. And this student finds that over 90%, or it says because over 90% of the participants' meals were homemade, however, susceptibility to fast food consumption was not a prime factor in the relatively lower iron levels measured in the collected samples. Now remember that that was something that was sort of stipulated or hypothesized before, that these immigrants being lower in economic standing are relying a lot on fast food. And this person finds that, well, that's not actually true. 90% of the participants' meals were homemade. So there's part of the findings. This finding strongly opposed published data on the population of interests, susceptibility to fast food consumption. Interviews also revealed that the majority of participants sourced their ingredients from big-name supermarkets and rarely sought out opportunities to buy local, organic, or enriched foods. So something else from the survey. The population of interest's low socioeconomic status thus played a significant role in the use of certain, generally less nutritious ingredients in the preparation of homemade meals, as participants' financial situations led them to prioritize affordability over healthfulness. So we've got some quotes coming out of the survey there. The choices that these participants made manifested in the low iron levels seen in the collected samples, confirming research done by Frith, Terhune, etc., and Villalpando, etc., that Mexican Americans exhibit iron deficiency, which is caused in part by low levels of iron in foods. Okay, so we found some new stuff here. This does confirm some existing research that's already out there, and this person is drawing conclusions based on evidence. Of course, that's part of the score. Now he's going to move on, or she's going to move on into the limitations. Though the ingredient selection behaviors of the participants interviewed is common amongst the majority of the population of interest, the small sample size of 10 Mexican-American households cannot represent the various cooking styles and specific ingredient choices made by each household. In addition, certain factors such as place of birth, upbringing within Mexico, urban versus rural, impacted a household's particular method of preparing traditional Mexican foods, with originally urban households more prone to purchasing affordable ingredients, while their rural counterparts often opting for healthful choices when affordable. The measured differences between iron content in the samples and that published by the USDA, however, is not without error. So this first part up here was more about the sampling, the population, and variables that the researcher couldn't account for that may have played a part in the way that the data worked out. This is going to be that second part of the study that actually did analyze the iron content in these samples. So that's more limitations coming in here. Certain sources of error in the execution of the chemical procedure included imprecise instruments that resulted in inaccurate measurements of small amounts of solution, such as the required 0.5 milliliters of the iron something or another stock solution. This error may have led to inaccurate calculations later in the procedure depicting a lower iron content value than present. Additionally, the preparation of 5 grams of each of the samples presented certain errors. Each 5 grams of one sample did not have the same composition as another sample of the same food item. Another procedural error was the imprecision of the burning procedure and ash collection. Because a Bunsen burner and fume hood could not be used, rudimentary burning equipment was used. As such, not all of the ash was collected for analysis. Some stuck to the pan, resulting in the calculation of a lower amount of iron than actually present. Further, not all of the ash was completely dissolved in the HCl solution, which may have led to an inaccurate absorbance reading. Comparison to the published USDA values may also have rendered certain error as the ingredients comprising each sample did not exactly match the ingredients of the USDA food items. These errors contributed in part to the observed difference in iron content measurements of the same sample. The two calculated iron content values for each sample were averaged in hopes of mitigating such errors. So, by the way, this student conducted used two samples for each of the foods, and that's what he's talking about there, and then averaged the two, hoping to eliminate error. Now, obviously, some of this had to happen because of the student's limited access, as he notes. And so when you have something that you weren't able to do because of you actually tried to get access to this, and it just couldn't happen. It wasn't because you were too late. It wasn't because you were sloppy or lazy. It was a legitimate limitation of being a high school student doing this study. You want to note that in there. Now, if there was something like, well, I kind of forgot to do this, or I just didn't bother to do that, or I chose this obviously terrible place to do this, that's not something you want to bring into this section, because that shows that there was more of a work ethic issue going on here. All right, I'm going to pause this one and do one short one to conclude.